My son is 5 years old and is nonverbal autistic. When I was pregnant, my grandfather-in-law Robert Sr. told me that if I had a son and named him Robert IV, he would inherit the family fortune of several $1 million worth of real estate and investments. This was his dying wish that his name lived on. I of course didn't know that my son would be nonverbal autistic, but I agreed to it because I wanted to do what's best for the family. My grandfather-in-law told me that his will was that the property be passed to his son Robert Jr., my Phil, and then to his son and my husband, Robert III, and then left to our son Robert IV, who would most likely pass it on to his son one day. Well, he passed shortly after and left everything to his son with future intentions known and agreed upon. I had my son Robert IV and I thought that would be the end of it, until a week ago. My Phil has 2 sons. Robert, my husband, the oldest, and Richard, who is in the middle child. Robert, my husband, is hardworking, good with money and reliable. My Bill, on the other hand, is not. He can't hold a job. He has multiple kids from different moms that he barely sees, let alone takes care of. He's also been in and out of rehab or jail, petty theft or drug use, etc. Nothing major, the last decade. He's been given every opportunity to turn his life around and refuses each time. He's been given cars, job opportunities, places to live that other people who don't have wealthy parents to fall back on would kill for. He never takes it seriously and always takes it for granted. The only reason he is alive right now is being constantly bailed out or enabled by my mill. Most recently we've given him our house, at my mill's suggestion, so he could have a place to stay after he got out of rehab and to give him a safe place for his kids to visit so he could try to build a relationship with them. My husband and I needed a bigger place for our growing family anyway, so we agreed to it and bought a second home, and Richard moved into the first. He now pays the mortgage and whatever is needed to maintain the property. It's been a few months and surprisingly he's been making the payments on time despite not having a job. I suspect Mill has been giving him the money. I thought everything was fine until last Sunday when we got together for dinner. My Bill mentioned how he couldn't wait to move to his new place. I asked what he was talking about and he said he was moving into grandfather-in-law's house. Excuse me? I pulled my husband and Phil into the other room and asked what was going on. My husband had no idea, but my Phil told me that he was changing the will to leave the property and investment/money my grandfather left behind for our son to Richard. My husband/son would be getting my Phil property and smaller portfolio. Normally I wouldn't care, but this property was promised to my son. My son is nonverbal autistic, which we didn't know when grandfather-in-law passed away. I'm not sure if he'll ever be able to live on his own or take care of himself after we're gone. My husband and I always planned if that were the case our son could move into the property guest house and rent out the main home, which is currently being used as a family beach house for weddings or events or reunions, etc. He could survive off that and the money from the portfolio to pay for a caretaker. This would give him a chance to live independently, and if he turned out to not need additional support in the future, then it was his to pass on or live in or whatever. Before anyone asks, we did not forget about our other 2 children. Our daughter will inherit house uncle currently lives in. Our second son will inherit our current home. Yes, their inheritance will be significantly less than their older brother, but it was never our money to give away. Grandfather-in-law, who was the original owner of the property, made it very clear that he was leaving this for my oldest son and him alone. We want to stand by his wishes. My Mill and Bill both knew of this plan. They told me they were supportive of my efforts to provide for our son's future and that I was a good mother for thinking so far ahead. I was deeply upset by this news and asked why he was changing his mind after promising to his father and to my husband that he would pass this on to his grandson and great-grandson. He said that he always intended to respect his father's wishes, but that our son Robert IV didn't live up to the namesake expectations that he's sure grandfather had for an heir. Yup. My son wasn't worthy because he was autistic. Since he knew that my husband would honor his word and leave it to our son, he thought it would be best if he cut my husband out altogether and leave it to his other son Richard. I asked him why he would leave it to someone as reckless as Richard when his youngest Rachel was more financially responsible. He said it was because only a son could be an heir. Apparently my Mill has also been pressing for months to give Richard the home, and that Richard told him that he deserved better than our charity. That since we had 2 homes, that we saved and paid for on our own, that it was only fair if he was given grandfather's property and money. I immediately excused myself, grabbed my kids and left the house. My husband and I talked, and while he's upset about what happened legally, Grandpa left the home to his dad and he isn't obligated to leave it to him in spite of his promise. He says that he's sure we'd find another way to provide for our son if he needs it. That, however, isn't good enough for me. We busted our butts and sacrificed so that we could give all of our children a home to live in someday. Now we're being put into a position to where we have to choose which of our children get a home? Not to mention, if our son does need addition, I'll support an income, he's going to have to live with us and off of our income and will not have the chance to be independent. This is when I thought about the dirty little secret buried in the family skeleton closet. 2 years ago my husband and his 2 siblings were gifted those DNA tests for Christmas and found out that Richard was only their half-brother. They confronted Mill, who admitted to having an affair, but she didn't know if Richard was Phil or her lover's child. When she got pregnant, she apparently ended the affair for good and hasn't strayed since. She begged her kids to not tell Phil because Richard needed his support. She said he would disown him and divorce her if he ever knew the truth. For the sake of keeping the peace, and since this wasn't my side of the family drama, I agreed to never speak about it again. But since we're breaking promises and going behind each other's backs, I just might print out his half-brother status and mail it anonymously to Phil. This will implode the family while I happily watch from the sidelines, as well as securing my husband/my son's place as the inheritor of the family fortune. After all, only a son can be an heir and Richard is not his son. Edit: I'd like to give some more context to those in the comments. I am not rich by any means at all. My parents grew up in poverty and worked their way up to lower middle class. I'm not educated beyond high school, and even then I was average at best. I'm neurodivergent like my son, but at a higher function level, and did not do well in subjects that did not interest me. My husband and I met on a high school track field, and it was love at first sight. His parents did not want us to be together. I was not the girl they picked out for him, and I didn't come from the right kind of family or come from the same religious background. My husband knew choosing me was going to make his life harder and he'd have less support, and he did it anyway. He lost his college fund, so he joined the military. I worked in a pizza shop while he was in training, and we got married right after, and I moved into his 2-bedroom apartment he shared with a guy from his work. I worked at a Waffle House around the corner while he took college classes online. We worked hard to get where we are now. He got out after finished college, and we moved back home and bought our first house, a small 3-bed 2-bath. I want to point out that in the first 5 years of our marriage, while they didn't accept me, they were never mean or rude to me. They called their son regularly, they were always cordial about me and asked how I was, and always sent gifts on Christmas and our birthdays. After we moved back and they actually got to know me, we became a lot closer. I also converted to their religion, and I felt like they were starting to accept me, and when I got pregnant with our son, I was officially a part of the family. I did not see any reason to not trust them or believe them when my grandfather-in-law asked me to name my son after him. My husband is a very sincere and honest person, so when he told me they were serious, that's all I needed to hear, and I agreed to it for the sole purpose of securing a better future for my son. I wanted to name my son after my own father and grandfather, and they knew that, and it was incredibly difficult to go to my dad and tell him I changed my mind and he wouldn't be named after him but instead after my husband and father-in-law. I could tell he was disappointed, but he agreed that I was doing the right thing for our son. So for them to put me through that, robbing me of the chance to pick the name for our firstborn under the promise of he will want for nothing, and then to snatch it away because he wasn't the kind of namesake you wanted, because he was autistic, because he wasn't the perfect heir they imagined, and they expect me to bite my tongue and be okay with my son being screwed over? Hell no. We're going to be visiting my extended family for the summer next week. I'm going to have my friend mail it from a local post office a week or two after we leave, so there's not a traceback to us, and we'll see what unfolds from a distance. Edit: Jesus people. I get it. I will clean up the story. Look. I added periods. Are you happy now? Small update: I've taken the comments seriously, and I have formulated a plan to orchestrate this from the shadows. So far I've executed step 1 and 2. My mill has 2 sisters. One lives only an hour away and has a drinking problem and loose lips after she's had a few. I figured if anyone had dirt on who Richard's biological father is, it would be her. I dropped by unexpectedly to Great Auntie's house with a nice bottle of tequila, and after a few she was in the golden state of being sober enough to accurately spill the tea but drunk enough to forget telling me. I've got a name and that he was local to the area. I've decided to hire a pie whom I just got off the phone with. I've asked him to find the guy and let me know when he does. I'll update with the next step once he's been found. Update 1. I apologize for making everyone wait so long to close this saga. I was visiting my family when one of my children got very sick and was hospitalized for a week. They are doing well and we are home now and will be getting surgery to correct the problem soon, so there is no need to worry on that end. That being said, up until a few days ago my entire focus was on my child and their well-being, so I put all of this on the back burner. I found Richard's biological father fairly quickly via Pi and requested that he collect an item with saliva on it and send it to a company with Richard's toothbrush I stole while visiting a few weeks ago before I left to see if they were in fact a paternal match before I put my plan into motion. I received confirmation via email and requested Richard's father's address from my Pi and got to work. I called my friend and told her to expect a package in the mail and asked her if she could open it and put the sealed, addressed and stamped envelope in the mail for me, and she agreed. Inside that envelope was a letter I typed and printed from the hotel office area claiming to be my mill, and that I recently found out via DNA testing kit that my husband wasn't Richard's father and that the only other man it could be would be him. I told him that I had hired a Pi to collect his DNA so that I and he had 100% proof of his paternity to Richard, and the DNA was a match. I told him Richard wanted to meet him at least once so he could have some closure, and offered him a large sum of money if he could make this happen. I then created a fake email account with my mill name and told him if he was interested to email me. I also included the DNA test and paternity test results. A few more days passed and I had an email agreeing to meet. I emailed him telling him to come by my in-laws' house at the regularly scheduled weekly family dinner time. I told him that my husband was aware of the affair and has chosen to forgive me, and that he will be present at the meeting to ensure that nothing happens between the two of us, and once Richard has closure my husband will write him the check and he is to leave and not contact me again. He told me that he understands and agreed, but that if Richard wanted to continue a relationship with him he would do it. He never had any children of his own when he was younger and was excited to learn he had a son. I told him that was Richard's choice, but to never contact me or my husband again. I also told him to bring the paternity and DNA tests with him as Richard wanted to see them and I didn't have any extra copies. I gave him specific instructions to not knock or ring the doorbell since my daughter gets notifications on her phone when someone rings and she didn't need to know about him unless Richard wanted her to. I told him the door would be unlocked, it always is for family dinners, and we would be waiting in the dining room. In order to spare Rachel from being dragged into this any more than she has. I called her a few days earlier and told her that I had bought tickets to a show happening on the same night as the family dinner and had forgotten about them before I went on vacation and asked her if she and her husband would like the tickets. She said yes and thanked me and I went online, purchased 2 tickets and then texted them to her. The only wrench in my plan I didn't anticipate was being in the hospital with my child at the time that all hell broke loose. I was in the hospital with them for about 3 days while my husband was at the hotel with our other 2 when he got the call from Phil. Mill's affair partner shows up as scheduled with the DNA and paternity tests and thanks my Mill for arranging this meeting. He apologizes to my Phil for what he did so many years ago and that he hopes he can forgive him someday and then hands the papers to my Phil. He then goes to Richard and tells him he's so grateful that he wanted to meet him and asked if he had any questions for him. Mill doesn't say a word and is completely frozen and Richard has no idea why this man is shaking his hand trying to hug him as Phil is frantically flipping through the papers. Boom. Phil starts screaming and cursing and comes to Richard's bio father to hit him when Mill comes in between them and starts begging for forgiveness and that it was so long ago and she hasn't seen him in 20 plus years, etc. Phil screams at bio father to get out before he kills him and bio father takes off out the door. Phil flips his sh-t and calls Mill a lying wh0 and to get out of house and to expect divorce paperwork from his attorney and she drops to her knees begging him not to do this and to think of Richard. Phil then turns to Richard and tells him that he's relieved that a lying stealing post-drug addict was never his son and tells him to get out and take his ex-wife with him. He then storms out of the dining room and starts packing all of Mill things and throwing them in the hall by the front door. Richard eventually takes his sobbing mother off the floor and leaves. After they're gone, Phil called my husband and told him what happened, followed by Richard. Richard says that Mill is with him at our house he's renting. He then demands that my husband abandon me and our sick child and fly home so that he can talk to his dad and fix things and that he doesn't want Mill living with him when he moves to his new house. My husband tells him no, that he will come home as scheduled and talk to Phil then and hangs up. My husband then calls me and tells me what has happened and I ask him what he wants to do. He says he's okay and right now we're just going to focus on our family and we'll deal with this when we get home and we turn off our phones until then. We get home and I have a million missed calls from everyone. Bill got drunk and showed up at Phil's house later that night demanding he take her back and that she's his wife not his and it's his job to take care of her and that there isn't room for her at his new house. My Phil, as predicted, tells him that there is no new house now or ever, that only his son will ever inherit that house and to get out. Bill then punched Phil and Phil called the cops and had him arrested. Phil froze all of the bank accounts so Mill couldn't bail him out. Sil finds out about this the next morning when Mill calls her freaking out that Richard never came home the night before and Phil has blocked Mill number so she can't call him. Rachel calls her dad and tells her what happened the night before and that Richard is in jail. Rachel then lets it slip that she already knew. He then asks if Richard or Mill knew and she tells him that they did and he told her he was disappointed that he didn't tell her the truth before and hangs up. Rachel called Mill and told her Richard was in jail and Mill tried to bail him out but couldn't because her cards were frozen and Sil asked her husband if he'd bail him out but he refused since her father and him/his fa. They are business associates and that he's not going to get involved and that was that. Richard was in jail for a few days on assault charges when we got home and got caught up to speed on everything that happened. My husband went and bailed Richard out, solely for his niece's sake, and gave him a ride back to our rental home. He then went to Phil's house so they could talk. Phil asked if he knew and my husband told him he did. Phil asked him why he didn't tell him the truth and my husband told him he wanted to but that his mom begged him not to and that she was sorry and that it would never happen again and that he wanted to protect both of them and his siblings from the pain of a divorce. Phil told him he understood and that his mother shouldn't have put that burden on him and that he doesn't know what he would have done if he was in his position but that he forgives him. He told Phil he bailed Richard out and Phil says he doesn't care and that my husband can be there for him as his brother but he's done having him for a son. He says that Richard knew for years that someone who wasn't his father had bailed him out and taken care of him again and Richard never appreciated it and that he was done. He asked Phil if he was really divorcing his mother and he said he was. If she had told him about the affair when it happened they maybe could have worked past it but she lied to him for decades and he can't forgive that and he can't forgive that she passed off another man's child as his son. He's done with her and never wants to see either of them again. He then apologized to my husband about the house and that he knew it was wrong and that all of this has reminded him about the importance of keeping your vows/promises. He would have his attorney correct the will to its original state before filing divorce proceedings. Phil and Mill signed a prenup with an infidelity clause so she will get nothing she didn't come into the marriage with so she cannot interfere with the will or the house anymore. He did however request that my husband honor his request and not allow Mill or Richard access to the property. My husband agreed but said that he still needed to make sure that his mother was taken care of. Regardless of what happened she's still his mother. Phil then offered to build a Mill suite at our rental home with Bill so she could have somewhere to live and someone could keep an eye on Richard and his kids. My husband asked if he would drop the charges against Richard for the sake of his kids and my Phil said he'd see what he could do about it. My husband thanked him for talking to him and that he'd see him again once our child was feeling better. My husband called my mill, who is still a wreck, and told her what they talked about and about her moving in with Richard, and she's lost it. My husband then reminded her of their prenup and that he had kept her secret for as long as he did, and now he needed to stand with his dad, and she reluctantly agreed. He also spoke to Richard, who was also pissed off that he wouldn't be getting the property and now would have to share the house with his mother, and my husband also reminded him that we bailed him out and are letting him live in our home at cost. The least he can do for us, and his mother has let her live here too. He also reluctantly agreed. Finally, my husband called his sister to see how she was doing. She and Phil had a long talk and they're doing okay. He was disappointed that neither Rachel or my husband told her the truth, and that hurts, but that he still loves her and that he will always be there for her, but that he just needs some time to work through things, and he's going to call her and my husband when he's ready for us to have a family dinner again, but that we'd be going out to eat from now on. My husband and I had a long talk about how he feels, and he says he feels good getting the weight off his chest and having it out in the open. He feels bad about his mom, but that she made her choices and has to stand by them, and that he will make sure that she is taken care of if Richard drops the ball. We aren't sure what that looks like yet, but we'll cross the bridge when we get to it. I asked him how he felt about the will being reinstated, and he said that he's relieved that we don't have to worry our son anymore, and that he's grateful that everything worked out the way God intended it to. As for Richard's biofather, he emailed me after the dinner and asked what the hell happened, and I told him my husband couldn't handle seeing the man who slept with his wife in person and lost it. He was free to reach out to Richard and arrange a meeting if he wanted to, and to not contact me again. I sent him Richard's phone number and deleted the email address. I have no idea if they are in contact or have any current plans to meet.